Good evening. Welcome everyone to this event hosted by the Foundation for Science and Technology, which I, David Willetts, chair. I'm doing it in partnership with the University of Liverpool, and we're very much enjoying working with Tim and the university. Welcome to the people who are here physically with us in Liverpool, and also to our online participants for this event. The title, of course, is Should R&D Policies and Budgets Be Devolved to English Regions? And we've already been hearing through the afternoon very strong messages from Liverpool and Manchester as well about how much better they could do at spending R&D than anyone in London could ever possibly imagine. We've got the message. Everybody agrees. The one thing they can agree on is how useless London is at doing anything. Anyway, we're going to try to have some kind of rational assessment of these arguments now over the next hour and a half, and I think it's the right moment to do it. We've got obviously a new government with a place-based agenda. We've got the structures in place with metro mayors and new regional structures. We've got evidence from Professor Richard Jones, who's done fantastic work showing that the public R&D spend is distributed much less evenly across the country than private spend, which is a very important piece of evidence. And we've also got, I think, a very live debate on levels of public expenditure. We'll hear something about that next week, and then there'll be the CSR. And you could argue, if you're trying to get more money into science and tech in the CSR, arguing that this is going to go through mechanisms that help spread the money out across the regions may be a very good way of securing extra funding. And I always say one of the lessons I learned from having been science minister is the most important single job of the science minister is extracting money from the treasury. Everything else is a bonus. So if you're trying to do that, it may be that this focus on what can be done better in our city regions is a great focus. And the work we've done at the Resolution Foundation, the think tank of which I'm president, also shows that really that's key for economic growth. So it's a very live agenda. I do encourage people, especially our online, we'll have physical questions here, but we'll also, for our people online, do go to the website Slido and enter the meeting number hashtag, which I think you've got down there, 3017848, and I will be seeing the questions that come in online as well. Now, we've got four fantastic speakers. Let's begin straight away with our first speaker, Professor Tim Jones, Vice-Chancellor of University of Liverpool. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, David, and welcome again for the FST to come up to Liverpool. The first time in England you've come outside of London, and we're delighted to welcome you to our city and to the university. So the short answer to the question is yes. You won't be surprised. But I will caveat that only to a limited extent. I don't believe, for example, that the whole of UKRI funding should be devolved to regions. And I think the key question, and we've talked about it this afternoon in the earlier session, was how we best use current systems and structures to better devolve some of the R&D and innovation funding and not create a whole gamut of new structures and complexities which will make it even more difficult to do the things that we want to do. And I know that, despite the discussions this afternoon, we all believe in the greater good of the country. The research excellence of the country is very strong. It's internationally recognized, and we have to make sure we protect that, but also we need to diversify that research excellence. What I do believe is we cannot carry on with the existing model. It's failed. It's failing the nation. We have a highly centralized model. We have one of the most distorted economies in the developed world. The regions are underperforming economically compared to London and the southeast. And alongside that, we have major societal challenges in the region, in healthcare, education, and so forth. And I think those things are undoubtedly connected. Several years ago, I was a member of EPSRC Council. I'm looking at Lesley Thompson because she was on EPSRC. But several people told me repeatedly that it doesn't matter where the research is done because the country as a whole will benefit. And I don't think we can say that is true, actually. because I don't think what has happened shows that the model we currently have has worked. We've perpetuated a model where those parts of the country that have long benefited from significant levels of public sector R&D funding continue to get more, whereas those in the regions that traditionally receive much less funding continue to receive much less. And that distortion in funding is shown. Richard Jones from Manchester shared some figures with us today. The Greater South East of the UK has 36% of the population, but accounts for 55% of total R&D funding. And if you look at UKRI funding specifically, and of course UKRI is the organisation responsible for nearly 9 billion of government research funding. It includes the research councils, Research England and Innovate. In 21-22, the investment per person inside the Greater South East was £170. The investment per person outside the South East was £87, a factor of 2. And that distortion in R&D expenditure, I think, and I know Richard shares this view, has been amplified by government decisions around major research infrastructure in the past few years and indeed decades. Two notable examples. The Diamond Light Source was built in Oxfordshire at the expense of Daresbury in the Liverpool City region. That synchrotron was closed down, and that has been a great success story for Harwell and Oxfordshire. It's clustered in R&D expenditure. It's clustered in industry, commercial activity as well. The Crick Institute, more recently, was founded in King's Cross, London, not exactly a deprived part of the UK, and that has sucked huge amounts of biomedical research funding into the capital at the expense of the regions. Now, government has made infrastructure investments outside of London and the South East, but I don't think anything has been of the scale of those two investments, and therefore the impact has been much more limited. And perhaps the biggest distortion of all, and I thank my colleague Professor Louise Kenny for this information, is in clinical healthcare infrastructure funding, which was highlighted in a 2023 UK Clinical Research Collaboration report. The report showed that the Northern Combined Authority, so the whole of the north of England, was awarded £49 million in healthcare infrastructure funding in 2022. That infrastructure funding drives clinical research activity. There are individual buildings in London and the South East which receive more. The Crick received £70 million. The Sanger Institute in Cambridge received £115 million. Significant. And then just consider this statistic. For spending on healthcare infrastructure in that year, in the Liverpool City region, it was £5.42 per person for the population. In Cambridgeshire, it was a factor of 30 more, £160.84. And why does that matter? Well, of course, healthcare R&D funding stimulates economic growth, as it does in all the sectors that we work in. But in healthcare, it matters because of health outcomes, because all the evidence shows that the health outcomes for the population where the healthcare research is carried out is significantly better by 20 to 30%. And where do we have the major problems in healthcare? It's in cities and regions like Liverpool and the rest of the North and the Midlands. So we've amplified inequalities as well as the problems over economic growth. And I am being provocative deliberately, as you'd expect. So place really does matter. Appropriate levels of government R&D funding help retain highly skilled graduates, postgraduates, so they don't just move to London and the South East. It helps cluster in business, private sector investment, including foreign direct investment. It will increase the number of spin-outs and spin-in companies. It will help drive economic growth, one of the key missions, of course, of the new government. It provides attractive job opportunities for local people. And as I've said, in the specific case of healthcare funding, it significantly improves health outcomes and reduces inequalities. So that's the problem. How do we solve it? And it's difficult. I think we all agree it's difficult. There's no simple answer. And as I said at the beginning, I don't believe we can simply rip up UKRI and other R&D agencies and channel all the funding into the regions, not least because I don't think the capacity and expertise within regions is actually commensurate with the work that would be required to deliver it. We also risk competition between regions and major duplication of effort, which also would not certainly help the nation. And I know we all remember the regional development agencies, and David, you talked about it this afternoon. I worked in nanotechnology, and every region built a nanotechnology centre, which really didn't make sense. But there are things that could be done which build on previous schemes and existing schemes which could be raised in profile and value to encourage more devolved funding into the regions. I think one obvious area is in capital investment. We've already talked about the impact capital investment has on R&D. And the RPIF scheme has been a fabulous scheme. For this university, the MIF, the Materials Innovation Factory, through the collaboration with Unilever, is a fabulous success story based on great research in materials chemistry, long-standing industrial collaboration, and so forth. Now, MIF is not a place-based scheme. It's a national competition. But you could put a place-based lens on it to ensure that more of that funding went into the regions and were aligned with the priorities, the innovation priorities of specific regions. We also know that when private sector investment is required for capital funding, for example, in building space for incubation, for innovation, laboratory space, expensive facilities, which are much needed around the regions to promote spin-outs and so forth, that's an expensive model, and there's a viability gap in the region that doesn't exist in the southeast. You need the public sector funding to fund that gap, to plug that gap, to make the private sector investment proposition work. You can't charge the same rents for lab space in Liverpool, Newcastle and Leeds as you can in Oxford, Cambridge and London. So there are ways that public sector help could address some of those challenges. And then there are other, I think, very successful place-based innovation schemes that we just need to expand and continue. Strength in Places was a big success. I think there's been 1 or 2 rounds. And in Liverpool, ICON, led by the School of Tropical Medicine, but also involving the university here, has been a great success story. We could do more in that space. There's been work in innovation zones and investment zones. Can we do more to again align with regional priorities and regional innovation plans? And of course, Innovate, we'll hear from Innovate from Dean shortly. There's been the Launchpad scheme and so forth, where money is going directly to companies and SMEs in regions to promote that regional need. And then finally, could we do something around low TRL Research Council funding? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm going to quote Matt Rosinski, who gave me this idea, so I don't claim credit for it. But we could use a place-based lens to final funding decisions. We all know you sit on a panel in a research council, and let's say there are 10 proposals deemed to be excellent. They're above the threshold for funding. But in reality, there's only enough funding for 4 of those proposals, so 6 get kicked aside. That's the standard model. Now, suppose all 4 of those were from London and the South East, and number 5 and 6 were from Newcastle and Liverpool. What you could do is say, well, actually, we'll only fund 2 in London and the South East, and we'll fund 1 in Newcastle and Liverpool. So you get some place-based lens within the final decision-making, but you do ensure that that excellence threshold is met. So, you would expect me to say these things. I'm Vice-Chancellor of Liverpool in a region which requires more funding. But indeed, UKRI commissioned an independent report from SQW, which made some recommendations around these types of interventions. We are starting to see some of it flow through UKRI, including EPSRC. It can be done, but I would suggest that we need to do more of it. So none of this is easy, but I'll come back to how I started. We cannot continue as we are. We have one of the lowest growth rates of any economy in the world. We have one of the lowest productivity of any economy in the world. The current model is not helping that. So change is needed. That's my provocation.
Very good. Thank you, Tim, for that. A great way of setting the debate going. Our second speaker is Thomas O'Brien, who is Vice Chair of the Liverpool City Region Innovation Zones Programme that incorporates Freeport and investment area regeneration. Tom has been already making important points about the case for the spend being devolved here. He's a professional economist. He has worked at KPMG and the Treasury. He's also an honorary professorial fellow at the University of Manchester. We very much look forward to your remarks, Tom.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Lord Willetts and Professor Jones, for your welcome, and all guests here at Liverpool. Great to see you this evening. I'm honoured to be here and speaking on a topic which is truly important for the economic future of Liverpool and its city region. I'm the Vice Chair. I want to tell you about, if you want to devolve money, what are you devolving it to, what's going on here which would make it worthwhile. So actually, a little bit of flavour of that. I'm the Vice Chair of the Liverpool City Region Innovation Zones Programme. And I and the board, we work with the Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham, to help promote innovation and fundamentally to help create good jobs for communities right across the conurbation. That's what we're about. It's creating more and better jobs for people in the Liverpool City region. So the Innovation Zones Programme, what is it? Well, it's a new approach, and it's one of the largest regeneration initiatives in the UK. It combines capital funding from our friends in central government. It has tax incentives, so when companies come and expand here, they get a good deal, which makes it better to be here than somewhere else. And we have some modest skills and innovation funding to put that together to make a more attractive package. And that national support, we have it in something called a Freeport, which was established by the UK government a couple of years ago, and also the investment zone. And they're two different words, and we're putting it all together in the Innovation Zones Programme. And we have much of it already in place. So, for example, we have business parks and sites that are expanding or coming on stream, and they provide ripe locations for new and expanding companies to establish and grow. And they're targeted for the needs of key sectors. So life sciences is the obvious one. So that's here, we're right now in the knowledge quarter, where we're going to be putting money into. Skytech Daresbury, people mentioned, is another great location that companies can expand and we can attract foreign investment in. So that's life sciences. And then we have other sectors, particularly modern logistics and advanced manufacturing. Some of that's going to go into a new business park we're bringing on stream in Parkside, in St. Helens, at the edge of the conurbation. So we're wrapping around these hard things about site locations and financial incentives with skills and innovation support. And it's called the Innovation Zones Programme because it's the innovation which is the element of the wider strategy for the economic future of Liverpool City region, to be an innovation superpower. And we already have many of the ingredients. If we had them all, probably wouldn't be here this evening. We have many of them, but not all of them. And I just want to give an illustration of some of the ingredients that we do have to give that sense of optimism. So, Unilever, one of our great companies in the locality, founded its first laboratory in the early 1900s here in the Liverpool City region. Fine, some of you may know that. What I didn't know is a couple of years ago, they have 850 scientists here in the Liverpool region. And a couple of years ago, of their global patents registered with national authorities, 524, half of them originated here in the Liverpool City region. The universities, the University of Liverpool, you've got the materials chemistry research. 99% of it is rated as world-leading or internationally excellent. I mean, you could do better, but only by 1%. I mean, 99% is a pretty strong figure.
We're challenging the 1%.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So 99% world-leading, internationally excellent. You've got the School of Tropical Medicine. You know, they attract research funding per academic, which dwarfs the scale that even Oxford achieves. So they're just a few of the ingredients that we have already. So we've got the history, and we've got elements of the today, about innovation being part of our DNA. But what about the tomorrow? And that's kind of what this topic is heading towards. And we want and we need to do better. because our economy needs to catch up with the Southeast, and we need to give residents the jobs and opportunities they deserve. And we have a stretch target that the combined power of our businesses, learning institutions, voluntary and public sectors will move towards allocating approaching 5% of gross value added to research and development. Now, that's higher than the UK target, and I think the figure right now is maybe 1.5, so it's a hell of a stretch target. But that's what the Metro Mayor has put forward, because we believe that that's the type of change which will help drive the economy forward for the benefits that I mentioned. And so how would that come into practice, and what does that mean for this type of agenda and the agenda that I'm promoting in the Innovation Zones programme? Well, wouldn't it be fantastic if the UK's preparedness to use vaccines and other therapeutics to take on the next pandemic was anchored here in Liverpool, using our strengths in research, development and biomanufacturing? Why shouldn't it be? In fact, that's why the Innovation Zone programme that I'm involved with is putting capital funding into investing in infrastructure, including new high-tech commercial labs here in the Knowledge Quarter and at Elsevier, and expanding partnerships with globally significant national companies in Speak that manufacture vaccines and other medical therapeutics. And trade, 45, nearly 50% of trade is with North America, and we can expand that. But wouldn't it be better if it could be expanded and made more cost-effective with greater digitization of customs and trade regime, which frankly is still pretty old-fashioned in the way it works on the ground? And that's the type of challenge that we're putting innovation funding into with the university and its consortium partners. But that's just pretty modest amounts of money, which is, I think, why we come to this debate about getting more devolution and more of the resources under local control. And to bring a personal note on this, I worked on this agenda. I left this city in the early 1980s, and this place was struggling then. And the contrast with London was just quite extreme. I came back 3 years ago, and I'm really quite proud to see how Liverpool and the city region has rebounded and organised and regained its civic pride. So that's very encouraging, but we know we're not standing still, and the competitors have moved forward as well. And so I think that's why we need to tackle this issue. Now, that answer to the question, a partial answer to the question is yes, that we need, to be more specific, we need national policies and budgets which drive research and development. They've got to be better and more equitably targeted across the English regions. Better and more equitably targeted across the English regions. And that change needs to happen quickly and decisively. Now, one way of doing it would be through devolution. And certainly in the Liverpool City region, that would play into a wider canvas of our enhanced capability to deploy combined local and national resources for locally determined economic and social needs. The combined authority which the Metro Mayor heads, that's been around for several years now, and it has experience and solid financial systems and operational capacity to do this sort of thing. So we're not moving this into a blank canvas or a black hole. We've actually got the institutional and financial strength to do it. Another important advantage of devolving it would be that we could match up these national programs with other sources of finance that we have. Right now, it's very kind of salami sliced, and you do a little bit here and a little bit there. Some of it might come on stream this year, some of it might be 3 years from now, and you can't really make the impact that you would like. So that, to me, and when that, at worst, at best, that's suboptimal, that approach, and at worst, it's messy and ineffective. So that's kind of why I'm excited about this. Now, I do recognize there are arguments in favor of elements of the existing centralized system, because obviously some elements of policy are probably more sensibly set nationally rather than at a local level. But even in that situation, I think my plea would be, surely there can be greater transparency in allocations and spending across regions, and surely there can be a more influential involvement of the regions in priority and decision-making. Professor Jones gave a little illustration of that, but that should be absolutely mainstream, not decisions appearing white smoke through a chimney from London, but actually folks from Liverpool City Region or Manchester or West Midlands, wherever, involved and influencing the decisions. So we're keen, to summarise, we're keen to be involved in a constructive conversation on this to change the status quo. There is a way to deliver it, whether it's a full scale like this, whether it's some hybrid, I'm happy to discuss it. But there is a way to make a change so that Liverpool City Region and other places can have a better slice of the pie that we contribute towards. Then the power of innovation and research and development can be better harnessed, as it was in the industrial mercantile age when the northern cities flourished. And I can see that happening again. And I'd very much encourage us all to be part of that journey. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And we now turn to our third speaker, Dr. Lesley Thompson, who joined Elsevier in 2016 as Vice President. Before that, many of us have happy memories of Lesley at the EPSRC, spreading that money around. Don't know where it all went exactly, but it was very good of you to come along and speak to us today, Lesley. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Okay. So I feel a bit like the fool guy because I'm not advocating for Liverpool. I wear many hats, and I'm going to talk about the multiple hats I wear or have worn. Okay, so let's declare those hats. I work for Elsevier. It's a FTSE 10 company, and we make global investment decisions. I'm a member of Keele Council, so I look at Keele and how we help that environment. I was chair of the Oxfordshire LEP, Innovation Board, and I also worked at EPSRC. So I bring a number of perspectives to this, and I will just say my mother was a Liverpudlian.
That's okay.
Okay, so. Okay. So I want to tell you a bit of story about Elsevier. So before I joined Elsevier, they went on a global search to try and find where they should centre their data science centre. You might think of Elsevier as a crusty old publisher, but actually, Willetts, our parent company, combines leading content with data sets and powerful analytics and technology to serve many business sectors. It's a little-known company. But that global search led to an investment decision that we should go to London to set out our data centre, our data science hub. That was because there was top talent, attractive location, and critical mass. And actually, when I was in EPSRC, as I did 10 years before that, I used that to try and defend the budget for EPSRC when Microsoft moved to Cambridge and when Elsevier came in. So there's a virtuous circle and a network between some of these actors. We're fast forward post-COVID, and actually for Elsevier, we've had to reduce our footprint because most of our colleagues don't come into the office every day. So in London, we've gone from 3 sites to 1 site, and in Oxford, we've gone from 700 desks in the office plus to 70. And that meant we had to do a relocation, and because of the Oxfordshire LEP, the guy who was in Fortescue, a spin-out from Williams Engineering, rang me up and said, we want a new HQ. Could we talk to you about your building? So we now have Fortescue in our old building. That's a picture of our old building. And that's brought 4,000 plus jobs to Oxfordshire. So these networks of contacts and making things happen, I think, are really important. I've got to press this button again. Okay. So now I'll go on to talk about some of the work we're doing in Elsevier as an analytics company with organisations around the world. So in 2022, following the CHIPS Act in the US, the NSF set up a new directorate. The directorate was to look at technology, innovation and partnerships. And they came to see us and they said, we have a problem as a new directorate. We need to prove our worth. We need to show to NSF leadership, we need to show to local politicians and academia and industry that the investments we are making are equitable across all jurisdictions, in states, territories, congressional districts and beyond, and we need to focus on promising key technologies to achieve local economic benefit. It's sort of got a resonance, some of the stuff we've heard from Liverpool. So actually they came to us and said, could we work with them? So we've now built an interactive portal where you can go and search all the investments down to a congressional level of where the investments are, and we will track outputs from all those investments. And it came up earlier in the round table, but having evidence of what works in these investments is critically important. So in NSF, the contention is they've got money, they're investing it in research and technologies, it'll lead to innovation and jobs. And they've put £1 billion a year aside for that. When I left EPSRC, we had a really lucky year, thanks to David, and we had £1 billion to spend. So, okay. And then we had an approach from Cornell, and Cornell were being criticised for being very focused on the New York region and encouraging lots of prosperity in New York. So Cornell said, could we do a bit of a study for them to look at where their PhD alumni went and where they were? So we did this work. We looked at 5 cohorts over a 20-year period, and we looked at the engineering and the agriculture and life sciences parts of Cornell. And actually the good news was 18% of Cornell graduates, PhDs, went to California. 25% stayed in the New York region, but the rest were distributed right across the country. It wasn't that having PhDs in Cornell was only prospering the New York region. I'd love to do that map of the CDTs in the UK. Okay. And then if we come closer to home, about a year ago, TU Eindhoven, the Technical University of Eindhoven, came to us and said they were working with this concept of a 4th generation university, a university that was mission-driven, both in research and education, that enabled social value creation, was transdisciplinary, was ecosystem orientated, and had innovation spaces. So we've done a lot of work specifically with Eindhoven. You can read the report, but actually we're now expanding that approach. And yesterday we had the launch meeting with 9 universities from around the world to see if we can do more work on some of the ways that you might measure what a 4th generation university is. And this is but one data set from the work we did with TU Eindhoven. This TU Eindhoven is in the Brainport part of the Netherlands, so it's really important for the Netherlands economy. And we were able to show that when you were an alum of TU Eindhoven, 30% of you stuck in that region. And that's really important because that helps generate jobs and keep stickiness. And for TU Eindhoven, it's really helpful because the Netherlands has now decided to invest 2.5 billion in the Brainport area. And in the last round of National Growth Fund in the Netherlands, it attracted in 2.4 billion. So there is something about people and stickiness that is really important in this debate. So let's come closer to home. I couldn't leave without showing some data for Liverpool. So this shows, for academic published papers, where Liverpool, between 21 and 24, co-published. So Liverpool is not an island, I'm sorry to say. It's a very collaborative and networked university. Manchester is its closest partner, but actually it works right across the UK, and that's a real strength of the University of Liverpool. So that's what happens with academic partnerships. I want to turn your attention to the map on my left. I can't do left and right. The map. The map shows, if you look at all the papers that are published by Liverpool, where the corporate partners are headquartered, where the addresses are on all the papers. Okay? So Liverpool, while it is a really important university in the region, it really contributes across the whole of the UK on corporate academic collaboration. And I'll just draw your attention to Oxford Nanopore, a very famous spin-out from the University of Oxford, but its innovation and its growth is being fueled in part by collaboration with the University of Liverpool. So we'd be very careful about what we throw away, Tim, as well as what we gain. Okay. So I couldn't resist this. I just thought this data blew my mind when I looked at it yesterday. So this is Liverpool John Moores, and I apologise to the other universities in Liverpool. I couldn't spin the time out to do all of them. But this shows Liverpool John Moore. Again, Liverpool John Moore does not work just in this region. It collaborates with corporates across particularly England. And then look at this. and we're talking about the region. So, Unilever up there, Syngenta. Arsenal Football Club is the 4th biggest corporate collaborator with Liverpool John Moores, followed by Liverpool Football Club. And then look, we've got Manchester United Football Club. Now, would the people who live in this region, and my mother was a Liverpudlian and supported Liverpool, is that something they want to see from their local university? You might want to debate that. Okay, so I've given you a whistle-stop tour through lots of data and given you some food for thought. I'll just show this. Excellence really does matter in research, and there are many ways you can measure it. But if we look at the University of Liverpool, and when it publishes on its own, it has a measure of quality, field-weighted citation index of 1.2. John Moores has 1.02. If you collaborate nationally, that improves. If you collaborate internationally, that improves. And then if you collaborate with corporates, it goes up to nearly 4. So there is something about corporate and academic and international collaboration that is really valuable. And we have to think very carefully about the balance on how we might destroy that. So my personal reflections, I think the real output from universities are people and ideas, and people matter most. And the debate hasn't really been around people, it's about things and names of research areas. Putting my Oxfordshire hat on and putting my Kiel hat on, in Oxford now there's a much more stronger focus on social inclusion and trying to get rid of the town and gown image of Oxford. And in Kiel, we're building really strong links across the education supply chain because we think that's important for the situation in Staffordshire. If we balance place-based investments, and I would suggest balance, not one hard turn of the tiller, and maintain excellence, I've not heard any conversation about the impact of COVID and people having different geographies they live in. We've certainly changed our geographical footprint. We don't have those offices. I know I go around lots of universities, they still have to do something about their space utilisation. But actually, what does the change working pattern give for what we're going to do on place-based investments? In everything I've done, it's critical that you have networks and you have co-creation, both at a regional and national and an international level. And universities on the whole are pretty damn good at that and have got better over time. Regional devolution is not symmetric, and I think that's a real challenge for us. You might be very well off with mayors where you are here, but that's not the case across the UK. People have already talked about the lessons of the RDAs, but there were also the science and innovation audits in 2016. And while they gave a good account of each region, there was no comparison to check which one said AI was their strength and how that compared nationally. And then finally, I think in a time of tight fiscal being, we have to think very carefully about how we can invest to achieve multiple objectives and achieve bureaucracy and red tape. As a corporate, I can't tell you how many times I have to explain to people on how you go about getting a shared PhD student with a university because they just don't understand CDTs, DTPs. We need to simplify, keep it simple, and really motor on this. So, I don't know why that's come up, but we'll have this picture, it's much better. Okay, so my recommendation for the future is to think about focusing on networks and people in their investments. And it comes from a good source, because it was Oppenheimer who said the best way to send information is to wrap it in a person. And I think if people are naturally networking, then you actually grow an ecosystem that flourishes and changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lesley. Research partnerships with Arsenal. That really is pushing it to the limits, but that's bold. That's an idea to think about. And our final speaker is Dean Cook, who is Director for Place and Levelling Up at Innovate. UK. He has a close understanding of the different regional and local programmes which Innovate UK already runs. Dean, we very much look forward to your comments. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everybody. Check that I'm driving it the right way, no wrong way. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is disappoint everyone. I'm not going to take a position on devolution. I work for Innovate UK, one of the 9 councils of UKRI, and we deliver to government policy. And it's for ministers and for policymakers to decide on devolution priority. But I would just reflect, I think the genie's out of the bag, right? I think the arguments have been made. I think the arguments have already been made that we've got one of the most concentrated centralised R&D systems in Europe. And maybe we need to do something about that polarisation. So for me, this isn't about devolution. Ministers will make decisions. Actually, this is about how do we, as a national body, as a national funder, how do we support that agenda? So Innovate UK, one of the things we've done is, so those who know us, you'll know we have our plan for action for businesses. That's our strategy. We didn't call it a strategy at the time because the signals from number 10 was there's too many government strategies, don't call it a strategy. So we call it a plan for action. But if you have a look, in 2021, we published our plan for action for businesses, and that was our strategy. But it had lots of verticals, lots of horizontals. It was too complex. We just very, very simply reframe our strategy now and say we've got 3 strategic priorities. They are the domains that we support in terms of the sectors and the sort of challenge areas, which are net zero, health and life sciences, food and agriculture, digital and technology. And you can see a neat alignment there to the industrial green paper that's just been launched. Place, which I'm passionate about. This is my leadership responsibility. And then the products and services, all the support we bring to all the brilliant businesses and all the brilliant innovators who are across the UK, and making sure we have that right customer journey, so we're giving the right support from startup all the way through to the scale-up needs of those businesses. And that's not just about what we do by ourselves, that's how we work with other partners, other parts of government. So place. Why am I passionate about place? Well, first a confession. You can't tell it from my accent. Unfortunately, I was born just outside of Slough. But as a young bioscientist working for a then government agency, it was one of the science agencies of what was the Ministry of Agriculture at the time, I was relocated in the 1990s to North Yorkshire. Everything goes round and round, okay? Let's get more of our government assets outside of the greater London. It was also at a time we were coming out of recession, great opportunity to build a new headquarters, big shiny laboratory in the north of England. And that took me up just outside of York, where I've been for the last 30 years. And so this whole regional agenda really means something to me. As a young bioscientist, I was relocated to be part of a bioscience cluster in North Yorkshire. And so the opportunity to move and to be part of a community, so that if my job goes today, there are other opportunities locally. This whole agenda really resonates with me. It's very personal. So if I go back to our plan for action and our strategy, because what I'd like to look backwards before I go forwards. What have we done this last SR? So the first thing I'm going to say is, I think we're a very, very different organisation now from the organisation we were from 3 years ago, and very much a different organisation from the organisation we were 10 years ago. Just before I joined Innovate UK, there was a government review of the Technology Strategy Board. We've got rebranded, as those of you who know Innovate. And it gave us a good tick, and it said, brilliant, don't mess, it's working, but it is a bit place blind. And I would like to think that we're not place blind anymore. So in our plan for action, we laid down 3 strategic priorities for what we were going to do in this place agenda. And I think other speakers already touched on this today. So the first thing is this, and I said this in the round table earlier on, the UK, we're quite small on the global stage, right? Our national ecosystem is a cluster. If you're Silicon Valley and looking at the UK, you're not looking at Liverpool City region, you're looking at the UK, right? So it's incumbent as us as a national funder to look at our national ecosystem and making sure that we are boosting all the component parts, investing in our regional capabilities, but bringing it together as a coherent ecosystem that is globally competitive. That means, I need my colleagues in those domain teams to be thinking place and not just the usual national competitions. So that's a series of commitments we're making in terms of how we would do national programs differently. Connecting national to local, and that's already come up. We can't have the disconnect. I'm just thinking about things coming on stream in investment zones. We've got free ports. The devolution bill is almost certainly likely going to give much more greater powers around things like the net zero and the green economy and skills. How the heck do we in the R&D system have any impact on place if we can't connect to those things that are happening locally? So we made a big commitment to put a lot of energy into connecting what we do nationally to what's happening locally. And then finally, driving that local income. So there's been a reference to numbers, and I'll give you some numbers. I think in 2020-21, I think about 55% of our funding went outside the Greater South East, which wasn't bad, considering about 45% of the R&D business, R&D intensive business population sits outside the Greater South East. Well, in the last couple of years, we've now pushed that to 66% of our funding outside the Greater South East. Now, those numbers haven't been released yet, but they've been validated, and I know that we've really sort of shifted how much investment we're making in that respect. Another reflection is we are a national body, but we've got deep local reach. I spoke about the fact I live and breathe in North Yorkshire, right? Most of our frontline innovation staff are field-based. We have got innovation experts all across the UK. We've got over 600 innovation and growth specialists, locally based, delivered in local partnership with both the university sector and local authorities, but local teams all across the UK. We've got the fantastic Catapult network. Again, strategic assets very often sat deliberately within an innovation cluster distributed all across the UK. So we're a national body, deep local reach. It's very, very easy to focus on the money. So what we mobilise in terms of place programmes, this is seed funding, right? Because we need to be much more ambitious than just thinking about local programme support. Because at best, all we can do is we can bring some public money to build local capability and capacity. Because what we need is we need regions to be able to be nationally competitive so they can compete for a greater share of the national funding that's available. And that's how we've been using our targeted programmes. And we've got a plethora of schemes, and reflecting the fact that all places are different. If you look at, if you compare Liverpool City region to North Yorkshire, they're very different places. Different levels of maturity, different levels of officer capability in the combined authorities, different university capability. We can't just run the same programme in each place. So we've got things like the launch pads, which are deliberately targeted to stimulate SME capability in places that may be a little less mature, all the way through to the innovation accelerators, where we've got bigger, bolder pots of money to drive those more mature ecosystems. But go beyond the money. What's really unique about the programmes is the way that we're starting to design them. Co-creation is a word you've already heard. Co-creation is the word I want you to take away. It's not about us as a national body doing place-based programme to places. It's about working in co-creation in partnership with local leadership to make sure we understand the local need, the local ambition. We also understand what's running, because I can tell you now as a funder, your worst case scenario is you go out with a funding call and you don't get enough applications, right? So the last thing you want to do is go in with an ill-thought scheme to find that there's a local scheme running that crowds you out. This is the smart way of doing it, working with local partners, bringing the right package together for the needs of that place. And then how do you move this on? And we at the round table earlier on, I reflected on this. You know, you can keep scaling these place-based programs to stimulate demand, but actually, if you want to mobilise enough resource to really drive local economies, we have to do we need a paradigm shift within the national R&D system. We need to make sure that when we are, I'm thinking forward to things like the industrial strategy, we're going to have some local growth plans coming through. How do we then wire up those new national programs so they've got big, bold place plays that don't just deliver that national outcome, but also drive the local economic growth that we're looking for? So in the action plans that we've launched, and the first one was here in the Liverpool City region, we get together with local leadership, we call out the strengths of the place, we also call out where we're already making the investment, and then we sit down, we agree what are the big actions we're going to take collaboratively to really join up that local ambition with what we can be driving as national funders. So we have 8 action plans so far across the UK, from working with combined authorities, and in the case of Wales, working with a devolved government. We've got more in the pipeline. But where I wanted to get to with you is just a few reflections. Because I think as we go into this spending review, I think we've just moved on so far in the last couple of years. I don't think we're having that polarised conversation anymore about it should all be devolved, right, locally driven. No, it should all be centralised. You can't trust them. We've moved beyond that point. We're getting into that really adult conversation in the middle about how we work together, work in partnership, co-create, national funders working with local bodies. But for this, you need culture change. And again, I said this earlier on at the round table. I think the most important part of the Levelling Up White Paper when it came to the R&D Place mission was the objective that UKRI was given to make place a strategic objective. That drives culture. Once you start driving culture, then the next thing you have to do is build relationship. And actually, you know, my team runs programs, but actually mostly what we do is we build relationship. And we need to be doing more of that. And then my next point, you have to be very, very patient, because it's so easy when you're doing all of this to not necessarily always have the trust. You can take many steps forward and then you can take a step back before you have to take that step forward. But I'm really optimistic, because I think we've really built some meaningful relationships, particularly the last couple of years. And I'm so excited. Where I want to end is I'm so excited with the prospect of a new industrial strategy, because I think this is a real opportunity to take advantage of the leadership capacity we've seen across the UK, metro mayors, devolved governments, ambitious local growth plans, big plays like investment zones. I think this is a really good point to sort of bring all this together and make the totality greater than the sum of the parts. And that's why I would like to leave that with you. Thank you.
Right, good. We've got half an hour, and we've got some questions coming in online. But let's start with some questions from people physically in the audience. We've got the roving mic. Yeah, and if you give your name and organisation, let's start there and then go across the passageway. Yeah.
Doug Kell, University of Liverpool, but once upon a time BBSRC. Looking internationally, one of the poster children is Germany, where the lender have a lot of funding to them, spend it wisely. A third of the Fraunhofer's income, for instance, translational institutes, comes from the lender. The amount of money currently going to the research councils is a third of what it was when I ran one. the absorptive capacity of the community is very high. You could double it tomorrow and you wouldn't be funding anything that wasn't worthwhile. And to give an example of scale, one example only because I'm not going to hog it, WASP, the Wallenberg AI software program operation in Sweden, is funding 600 PhD studentships in AI. Compare that with the UK's number of PhD studentships being funded across the band. It's all about scale. There's got to be a lot more funding. Doesn't the panel think so?
Right. Oh, and that's a hard question. Now, then, let's take that question as well.
Matt Rosinski from the University of Liverpool. I was very interested to hear these fascinating perspectives. I think it's important to make clear we're not asking for charity here. What we're saying is there's an opportunity, a national opportunity, to fully capitalise on globally leading knowledge assets, benchmarked with partnerships to deliver, with credibility, with ambition. And by doing that, we can be better partners with Cambridge, Oxford Nanopore, etc. We're not arguing to abolish these institutions. We're just arguing for balance. And I think there's a lot more that UKRI could do to drive that. And just coming to the example that Tim gave, Materials Innovation Factory, that's a sort of 20-year in the making overnight sensation, right? There was a lot of work that went in. I think Matt Reed from Unilever is here today. And sustaining that in an institution, the University of Liverpool did so much to sustain and create that opportunity. Yeah. Sustaining that in an institution that does not have the financial strength of Oxford or Cambridge or whatever is a real tribute to the university, but it illustrates that gap that has to be filled. Because I have to tell you, looking at the financial strength of regional universities today, comparing to what it was in 1999 when Andy Cooper and I came here, it's a totally different story. Could we pull that off starting from today? I don't know. And I think that's a huge question for UKRI. It's a big opportunity, but I think I totally resonate with what Tim says. I think things have got to change if we're going to seize those opportunities in the future.
Right, thank you. And then there was a question over at the far end, Angela, just over there. And then what I'll do is I'll work along the panel for you to comment on all three. Yeah.
Thanks. Lorna Green, Chief Exec at Liver Labs. A question really for the councils and the panel generally. So Tim mentioned Matt's idea of, can you take a portfolio approach to, you've got 10 great ideas, let's blend and make sure we invest across the regions. I'm less familiar with research councils, I'm very familiar with Innovate, and I know that Innovate took that approach a while back to say we will put 55% outside the southeast.
So don't worry, it was just you got bits of the stage falling off. Yep.
So Dean's comment about the latest figures are actually suggesting 66% is now outside the southeast for Innovate. So my question is, are the other councils looking to do that, take that approach? And for Dean, how much do you think the decision to specify 55% outside of the southeast has led to the 66% allocation?
Right. So we've got two questions about allocation and one question about the total, and I have to say they are linked. It's so much easier to rebalance if you're in an environment where the total is going up, and it's much harder to do if it's a completely brutal zero-sum game. So I think the questions really complement each other. Well, let's start at this end. Yep.
Thank you. Just a couple of brief remarks about all the questions. So I think I do get the feeling that a number of the streams of funding to innovation, particularly when it gets down to a local level, they're pretty small. So in that sense, I agree with you. Now, there's two answers to it. The best answer is to put more money in, and I would kind of lean towards that. Of course, whether that's viable in terms of fiscal prudence, I don't know. But what I would say is I'm encouraged also to get better packaging of financing and less small slicing and dicing and more chunks which are meaningful. And that is one potential benefit for devolution or something like devolution, because I think in the current process, you piece together a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and you're waiting, and this one's going to be 1 year, and that one, we're not sure where it's going to come. And that's why the thing takes 20 years rather than 2 years. That's simplistic, but there's something in that. So I think the advantage of devolution is that if you've got a variety of pots of money, which individually may not be as big as you'd like, but some on innovation, some on skill, some on physical regeneration around innovation zones and so on. You can locally piece them together more quickly, more successfully, and more tailored to what you need. So to me, that's part of the answer, and that's partly why I'm keen on this direction. And I think the second point I'd like to say is, in terms of the scale of the change, yeah, you have this feeling that this is, I think someone mentioned a tiller and moving the tiller a little bit. But we've got a super tanker which isn't going in our direction and is going very slowly. And if we move the tiller a couple of degrees right or left, it's not going to move much. So I'd actually be more in favor of a more substantive, decisive change.
Right, thank you. Your observations, both nationally and also on the devolved issue?
I would like to take Lorna's question in particular, because I think it's a really important one. I mean, the first thing to recognise is that all the councils of UKRI, we're not one amorphous blob. We're all quite different, we're all quite distinctive, we've all got different levers. So, you know, Innovate UK, it's much easier for us to change the demand driver, because it's easier to encourage more businesses that are not innovating to think about innovating, right? It's much harder if you're a research council and you're because our money is demand driven. So it's much harder if you're a research council. You can't just go and build new research excellent universities in a place, right? So the levers are different. And also the balance of money that goes in thematic versus responsive. So, you know, Innovate UK, a lot of our money goes into responsive mode calls. And historically, a lot of our money's gone into advanced manufacturing. That lends itself to places outside the Greater South East. If I look at other councils, so I've got colleagues from EPSRC in the audience, Andrew Bourne and colleagues, and I think their money's about 60% outside of the Greater South East, again because of the sort of work they're supporting, where the capacity sits. So it's not a straightforward answer when it comes to sort of moving. Now, what we are doing, though, is we're all sharing learnings between ourselves as councils and trying to operate and get best practice across the piece. So when we have looked at funders panels and seeing everything above the quality line, should you be rebalancing some of that money into other geographical places? We're not the only council that's looking at doing that. So we are developing a toolkit. We're trying to sort of move the whole of the UKRI beast, but it is a big tanker and it's not all so easy to turn. And I hope that relates.
Yep, thank you. Lesley?
I'm glad I don't have to defend UKRI, but I think Matt made a really important point, and that's about sustainability. So I think the one bit that we've missed. Oh, that's great. Yeah, lovely, thanks. Matt's point about sustainability, I think, is really important, because you can either shed loads more money, or you invest sustainably over a longer period. And I think there's something to be said about sustainability over a long period when you're trying to build partnerships and when you're really trying to bring in an ecosystem. If it's boom and bust and slimy slice, it doesn't work. So I think some continual level of funding over the longer term to build these ecosystems across the UK. Certainly for us as a company, we hate seeing calls for proposals because we run round and we get lots of calls from universities and we don't know quite what to do. If we could build long-term relationships with a limited number of universities around the UK, as we do in other places around the world, that would really help what we do. So I think you can either spend more money or you can have longer time periods for money. And boom and bust is the absolute enemy of what we're trying to achieve for the UK economy.
Tim?
Yeah, short answer, Doug, yes. But I think we all agree on that, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. Yeah, we do need more funding, but, you know, as a nation in R&D, but I'm not wildly optimistic. I mean, needless to say, I agree with Matt. We hadn't agreed what you were going to say beforehand, but Matt's absolutely right. And I do think the Unilever collaboration here, the MIF, everything about that, it's a really, really good example. And, you know, it would be difficult to pull that off in the current climate, I think, for universities, the scale of what was needed, because that was a co-investment. It was partly government, partly university, it's partly industry, at scale over many years. And, you know, when you look at what's happening in the sector, you look at the threats financially to universities around the country with the decline of international students, and of course it's that margin that allows us to invest in the research ecosystem. That's going to be more challenging, actually, and I think really should concern a government that said its primary mission is growth and economic growth. And that's also right. We're not, you know, it's not a charity. We're not after charity. We're after a fair share of the funding in areas where we genuinely are competitive, world-leading, internationally excellent, and we have those partnerships. I was delighted to see your collaboration, Matt. And, you know, my colleague, of course, we collaborate with lots of people. We've just launched a CDT, Gnomes in Maritime. It's a collaboration with Liverpool John Moores University. We collaborate across the nation. We collaborate internationally. We have a specific part of our strategy about that. But all universities do that. And it's an easy thing to say, oh, we just collaborate. We still need appropriate investment to drive some of the changes that are happening. An answer to Lorna, yeah, I think Innovate do devolve funding, largely because of catapults, actually. I think all the catapults are outside of the southeast of England, or certainly all the big ones. So quite a lot of Innovate funding does go outside of the southeast, and the same is not true for the research councils. As I said at the beginning, the starkest difference is in the biomedical area. And of course, that's amplified by the fact that the Wellcome Trust, which isn't a government organisation, but is the biggest funder of biomedical research, a charity, that also puts most of its money into London and the southeast and other organisers. So, you know, you get these knock-on effects based on some of the decisions that were probably made quite a long time ago.
Thanks. Perhaps I should just make one comment. I don't have a role now. I did serve on the board of UKRI until last year. And I would say that awareness of the place issue gradually increased during the time I was on the board from its creation. And some of the programs that we're now talking about, some of them indeed run by Innovate UK, but there was the development. We had RPIF originally, we had the creation of the catapults, we had launch pads, and interestingly, the launchpad idea began initially as a Tech City initiative to help the centre of London, and then because it worked, it's been extended and now has done very well on geographical distribution. We then had Strength in Places, and there's of course Innovation Accelerator. So over the years, instruments have been created that you could put more money in order to do more across the country. But I'd like to now go one step further and ask a question, and again, starting at this end, which is, what is the relevant unit to which devolution is supposed to happen? And let's live very dangerously. Are Liverpool and Manchester two separate units? And someone has to decide how much goes to Liverpool and how much goes to Manchester? Or are they to be seen as a single unit? You know, just an innocent question. I thought I'm sure there'll be very boring answers, but I just thought I'd throw that in. Let's go.
I'm happy to answer that one. Well, I was very, very pleased to see Liverpool John Moores University being even-handed in their support of Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester United. So that's a very encouraging signal about their ability to work with all partners. And that's the spirit of Liverpool, by the way. So that's partly an answer to your question. The more serious answer is, I think in many subjects, including this one, the way in which the political, administrative and institutional landscape has evolved in recent years does give strength to the metropolitan regions, the city regions. And I think, giving an illustration, I think the day after the Labour administration was formed and the new Prime Minister was elected, one of the first public meetings was the meetings of Metro mayors and the leader of the independent nations. So that was telling you, I think, what's happening more broadly, that the city regions are now increasingly recognised as important units of economic and social progress. Therefore, in very simple answer to your question, I think the city region, it may not answer the entire, I know your point, Lesley, it wouldn't necessarily work across all of England and the UK, I understand that. But in terms of making a start, it would fit very well. And here, therefore, I would be proposing that the unit of account and unit of receipt would be the Liverpool City region. Then, yes, is the other short answer to your question, the partnership and combination with nearby authorities, particularly the Greater Manchester City region. Absolutely, the Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham, with whom I work closely, the collaboration with the Metro Mayor, Andy Burnham, and it's almost daily. So absolutely, and clearly we would collaborate and cooperate, and there might be certain elements of the devolution or certain programs, you know what, it's best run with Liverpool and Manchester combined, or Liverpool, Manchester, Cambridge, fine, any and all of those options, I'm pretty sure we'd be open to.
Right. Got any very quick comments, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, I think it's all about functional economic geographies. I think the LEPs were too small. I think the in England, the combined authorities are probably heading to the right scale, but I think we shouldn't confine ourselves by geopolitics. And it's going to be different on the lens that you put it through. If you look at materials, you can see a big materials cluster across the northwest. But I would say that Manchester, Liverpool probably got very distinctive and complementary capabilities. But it's not a straightforward answer. But we should be very flexible in our approach.
Right.
Take your money, though.
So I'd absolutely agree. If you look at the clusters, there's no geography you can overlay it that says that's the right unit, and that makes it more complicated. But it's not beyond the wit of man that we can come up with something that would sort that out.
Right. Okay.
I'm just going to do the football thing. I'm actually quite horrified that Liverpool John Moores are collaborating with Manchester United. I'm a Manchester City season ticket holder, and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Liverpool. I can't believe we collaborate with United. But anyway...
Arsenal's okay. Manchester United.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but anyway. But seriously, I mean, I'm not going to obsess about what the body is in which any devolution would happen. But I do think there are opportunities across regions, you know, and we've already started conversations with Manchester, University of Manchester, the two Vice-Chancellors, myself and the new Vice-Chancellor there, the two mayors, thinking about areas where it makes sense for us to work together, and there are some obvious areas, and Dean's touched on materials, there's net zero technologies, there's one or two others, and if we can get that right, I think that would be a very powerful thing to do. Right. And, you know, we're only 35 miles apart, right? It's not very far. I mean, there's other distances which are perhaps more challenging, but I do think there are opportunities there, definitely.
I'm just going to now cover several of the points that have come in online. Some of them are comments, some of the questions, and I'll start at the other end of the panel of this. Is Innovate UK learning from chips and science in the US, and how the methodology on investing in heartlands could translate to UK equivalent kinds of places? You might want to come to that in a moment. Deciding innovation accelerators based on the maturity of mayoral combined authorities. We just need more of the same. Why not use uni and industry strengths in those places to decide, which I think was partly Lesley's point, that there's no standard model. Is there not a danger that if budgets and policies are devolved, it will create a greater disparity across regions? I'm not sure what that means within the region. I think between different regions. And then I'm going to add two other comments. There's a comment... this is a question. What has been the impact of no longer having access to ERDF funding? An important point. A moment of grief, private grief about Brexit, and then we will resume. Lots of ERDF, shouldn't forget that. And then if there's greater devolution, is there a danger that cross-regional collaboration declines and initiatives start to duplicate? Another fair challenge, going back to some of our experience with RDAs. So if we can crack on briefly on all those questions, then we'll hope there'll be one last opportunity for people physically here. Tim, do you want to start?
Gosh, I can remember them all. I mean, interesting about, I think there was like the Innovation Accelerator, and how priorities are determined. I mean, if I take the Liverpool City region, there was a lot of work done on the innovation strategy, which was it predates me actually, but it was a result of serious conversations with universities, businesses and other organisations to say what are the key priorities for this region. That's where things like materials chemistry, infectious disease, digital technologies, maritime and stuff came through. And so I think those conversations have taken place. So I think whatever devolution can take place could very justifiably take place through that lens and through that vehicle, because the key actors have already inputted into that decision-making and prioritisation. So I do think, you know, perhaps not all regions are as advanced as Liverpool in that, you know, I generally don't know. But I do think that there are very good examples where that can and should take place. So I'm confident about that.
Yeah. Lesley?
Bring back ERDF funding in some way or shape or other. It's made a huge difference to places like Kiel, and we're really, really missing it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add on some of the, what's your view on collaboration between different regions, the extent of promoting that, or will we instead have that kind of the notorious duplication of all the nanotech centres in each RDA?
So I look carefully around the room, and I'm conscious of who's to my right-hand side. All of this is down to people, and people making things work. And if people are collaborative rather than competitive, things work. But I have to say, there's a lot of drivers in ecosystems for people to be competitive. And I don't know where you balance competition and collaboration. Both have their place, but I would hate to go back to the 16 nano centres. That was a real waste of money.
Yeah. Do you want particularly to comment on this question about the US and their methodology for investing in heartlands? I don't know if that's...
Well, show my ignorance. I haven't heard of the particular mechanism. What I would say is I'm a practitioner. I listen to experts. I talk to experts. I'm a practitioner. I just want to get stuff done. But when you look at the international evidence, it's pretty mixed. What works in other countries doesn't necessarily work for the UK. We haven't had a cluster policy because of that lack of evidence. That's just fact. I'm reminded of something that Phil McCann, that many of you will know, has said quite often, which is maybe we look at the wrong international comparators. So we're a little bit lazy. We go to English-speaking nations because we can pick up their reports and we can understand them. So we look at the US, we look at Canada, we look at those sorts of countries. But they're the wrong ecosystem for a UK. Maybe we should be looking at some of the Scandinavian countries. So we need to get better at looking at the international evidence. But the truth of it is, I think where we are right now is we're learning from pathfinders and pilots that we've been trialling. And I think we need to learn for ourselves what works in the UK.
Right. Thanks. Really fun.
I think one of the questions was, if it's kind of devolved, would it end up being more disparate?
Yes.
And,
yeah.
I think that risk is really pretty low. And what you've got to look at is, in fact, I think some of the numbers that Professor Richard Jones has shown, we've got the exact opposite right now. We've got the exact opposite. So the risk of it getting more disparate, more uneven, it couldn't be much worse than it is right now with the highly centralized model. So in that sense, I think that is a very modest risk. It's a risk worth taking, and it's a risk that we can manage. And related to that very quickly, I don't know those 16 nano centres that you referred to. I wasn't in the country at the time. I'm sure you're right that it wasn't ideal. But you know what isn't ideal? Oh, let's get the best one, let's put it in central London. Let's get the best one and put it in Oxford. Let's get the best one and put it in Cambridge. That's not ideal either. And I can see that with my own eyes. And I can see that that's what's happened over the last several decades. And that's a situation that we're trying to change for the benefit of the UK economy at large and the places which have been lagging behind and need additional support to give the right conditions and jobs and opportunity for the people that live there.
Right. Now, let's take a final set of questions here. And this is your moment to make your final comments. And then I'll ask our panellists to make their comment. Oh, yes, right, great. So set the ball rolling.
Thanks. Celia Crawcott. I'm here actually as the chair, the independent chair of the Lake District National Park Partnership, not the authority, but it's partnership. But I'm also ex-BBSRC. UCL, and the Wellcome Trust when I led the Human Genome Project as the office lead. So, big experience in funding, big experience in being a recipient of funding, now working in an area where I imagine everybody in this room believes research and innovation really matters and is a key enabler of growth. So what do we do about regions where there just isn't really that capacity? If you look at Cumbria, we have 2 really significant employers other than the NHS, which is the single biggest employer. We've got BAE with a 30-year order book for the first time ever, or at least in decades, and Sellafield, which will not go bust in 100 years, I can promise you. We are short of skills, transport and housing. And we don't have a working research and innovation system. I'm not particularly expecting an answer, but we need to know when we think of regional devolution, you can't leave behind those big rural areas that have enormous importance. Oh, and natural capital is a key piece to the Lake District National Park.
No, thank you. No, that's very helpful. Thank you for adding that angle. And there's another question at the back there. Yep.
Hi, Sarah Jackson, University of Liverpool. A brief comment in defence, partial defence of the RDAs. I used to work for one. I completely agree about the 16 nanotechnology centres. However, there were some good things. Matt will remember the Centre for Materials Discovery. That was a key part of building the case for the MIF. That was aligning regional funding and university funding. Richard could talk about the Advanced Manufacturing Park and so on. So there were some good things that did happen. It's not about the labels of things, it's about the functions I think are important. My question is to the panel, we've got the green paper for the industrial strategy. What would you most like to see to really support this agenda?
Great question. And you're also right about the RDAs. Indeed, we rushed the creation of the Advanced Manufacturing Catapult precisely to be the rescue vehicle for the best things in the RDA so that they weren't lost, and it's done a fantastic job since. So, yeah, what should be in the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, reminding that regions are big, complicated places. Let's start again from after your... Oh, sorry, is there another question that I didn't see? Yeah, I apologise. Let's squeeze this one in as well. Yep.
Thank you very much for spotting me. Cheers. My question is, a number of regional leaders, including right here, I think, in Liverpool, have set R&D targets. But obviously, R&D doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I wonder what the panel's opinion is on the other rising costs of business, so things like industrial electricity, etc. What the effect of that will be on the overall kind of output of R&D across the regions.
Right, very good. Let's start that in.
I'll probably hand to the panel because it's 2 rather difficult questions to end with, yes. David. But
you're on such a roll and you were so eloquent before, you can do it.
So very quickly, those things highly interlinked. In Liverpool City region, we have got this very stretched target of trying to get our combined powers of business, universities, institutions go as far as 5% of GVA into research and development. And that's a real stretch target. I think when you've got tough business conditions, that's more difficult. That's the point you're making. That is something which I think we've got to work with the national government to try and make sure that the UK's national economic conditions are favourable. And that's clearly a major priority of the new administration. On the industrial green paper, I think we'd just like, my sense is, without going into the detail, I'd just like to see a process whereby the future of the UK isn't just as a block or the main existing successful centres, but is looked at carefully in terms of giving an opportunity for locations which have been less advanced or lagging behind to play their part, and I think that's what they can do and they want to do, and we have the ability to do that as well.
Great, thanks. Dean?
So I'm absolutely delighted to see that the importance of clusters is recognised in the Green Paper. Yeah. My hope is that it isn't dumbed down. So we'll see sector strategies, but I would be really disappointed if I see cluster initiatives that just sit in sector silos. I think we need to recognise what clusters really are. You know, very often the exciting stuff is when technologies are bleeding between different sectors. So I want to see a little bit of sophistication in terms of what rolls out of the industrial strategy.
Thank you. Yep. Lesley?
So
So let's pick up the Cumbria issue. I think it's a real issue. If we look across the UK, we don't have symmetric governance, and I think that is holding us back enormously. I do think there's this thing about joined-up ecosystems. So it's no good making an investment in research if you actually haven't got a working transport system. And we are not very good at this in the UK of making what is a complex system, cutting through and working out what are the principal things we have to invest in first. And I think that's a real problem in the UK. And the final thing I would like from the industrial strategy is please let it run for 10 years plus and have continuity across, sorry, David, political system. Because actually the UK cannot chop and change. This is a long term that we heard from Matt. So constancy and a focus in a direction, and then everyone can swing alongside. If we chop and change, God knows where we're going to be in 10 years' time.
I think there is quite a lot of shared bipartisan consensus. What Peter Mandelson wrote, what Vince and I did, what Greg Clark did, what this government has just produced, there's not a radical difference between them. The problem is we've had a couple of moments when individuals turn up and in a brief period of Secretary of State tear up what the rest of us have been busy building on. But as I say, in reality, I think one of the strengths of this Green Paper is it's not unlike several previous statements of industrial strategy, which is good news, I would say.
I agree, but how do we avoid the moments in a political system?
Yes, okay, all right. Tim?
Yeah, well, the Cumbria issue, I do think is a problem for areas that don't have combined authorities and so forth. And in fact, on a university level, I've talked quite a lot with the Vice-Chancellor of Lancaster about how we can work together. And, you know, he's no, I agree with that, but more broadly, that problem. So I don't have a solution, but I understand the problem and recognise the problem. RDAs, I agree with Sarah. And actually, I was, the RDA period, I was at the University of Warwick, where I was a Pro-Vice-Chancellor. And the RDA was critical for Jaguar Land Rover, basically going from being a basket case, which it was in 2006, 2007, something like that, to then being a really dominant player in not just in the West Midlands but more broadly. And actually, it was the RDA investments that kick-started that. It was then followed by an RPIF investment at scale from the government, and actually that whole corridor of the West Midlands, and not just at the University of Warwick and the co-location of JLR, Tata investment, but the supply chains that all clustered around the M40 corridor was a result of that. So I do think RDAs actually were much better than they're given credit for. But in terms of industrial strategy, I agree entirely with continuity of thinking and so forth. One thing I think is really important, we need a commitment to the skills agenda, because all of it will fail unless we get skills right. And this country spends far too little on education at all levels. That's not just a plea for universities, it's FE, it's schools. And what we need to do is commit to building a highly skilled workforce that basically the whole population can benefit from. And it will fail unless we have that. So those are mine.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think on the industrial strategy, I would add one point, which is that, frustratingly, higher education doesn't fit into the industrial strategy green paper particularly neatly. There's not much about HE in it, and there's just a kind of assumption that having great research-intensive universities is a sort of natural fact about Britain that doesn't require sustaining or working on. It's just there, and isn't it wonderful? And I think the university sector in particular could be slotted in under the services sector and asked to be identified as a specific subsector for a industrial strategy for the growth of higher education. I'd like to thank everyone for coming along this evening, both our physical attendees here. I'd like to thank our 4 panelists. I can say that our next meeting of the financial the foundation, the FST also stands for Financial Secretary to the Treasury. I always have to remember we're not talking about the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, we're talking about the Foundation for Science and Technology. Will actually be our event, our annual conference targeting early to mid-career professionals in STEM roles across government, which will be in Birmingham, on the 8th of November. We've got an event on the 2nd of December looking at the role of science and technology in delivering industrial strategy. I think we've had a fantastic discussion today. We very much appreciate the hospitality and the welcome here in Liverpool. It has got across very eloquently the message that there are city regions desperate to have more power to control their own affairs, and I think that's well understood. If one were trying to secure more money for R&D spend, putting it as a pitch to spread the money more widely, I think would be the most persuasive way of getting that extra funding. There are already some vehicles that could be used that Innovate UK now operate, but there are many other vehicles as well, and I hope today's discussions have given extra strength to that cause. Thank you all very much indeed. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, and thank you Tim.